Thank you, Mark, for your very kind words. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed very happy to be here again. I have very good memories of the former time I was here and the discussions that we had with your colleagues, and perhaps some of you were here, I don't know. I have the honor of giving an introductory remark before my former boss, Mr. Tuomioja, is taking the floor. Mark asked me to say something over or around the theme today. And as we have just noted the 20th anniversary of the reunification of Germany, Wiedervereinigung, and 21 years of the Berlin Wall, I wanted to say a few things that to come into my mind working right now in Berlin in the post-Cold War era. The Berlin Wall, in my opinion, was the concrete expression of a wall that ran through Europe. And the Finnish-Soviet border constituted about 1,500 kilometers of that, you could say, more invisible wall that divided our continent. This border did, however, not close in 1945. It closed rather slowly in a process beginning with the Russian Revolution and the taking over of power of the Bolsheviks. And at the end of the 20s, when Lenin had died and Stalin came, it was already fairly closed. And of course, with the Stalinist system, it closed definitely. So you could say that in this part, the Iron Curtain came down between a small state that used to belong to the Russian Empire and a state that for several hundred years had had an open border between itself and Russia, also during times when there were war or economic difficulties. People were used to move around. When I went to school, I had actually very little knowledge about our eastern neighbor, the Soviet Union. And to be honest, was not very interested either at that time. And living in Helsinki, my geographically closest neighbors and also the ethnic relatives of the Finns were the Estonians. Estonia didn't exist in my picture of the world. So the wall divided not only geographically two countries, it also divides the mind and limits our concept of our world. Now I have worked as a diplomat close to 40 years, and of these 13 years in the Soviet Union and in Russia. And I crossed the Iron Curtain, the wall between our two states, more often than I can say. My first assignment abroad was Moscow in 1976, 2 years after, for example, the publication of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, but also 1 year after the Helsinki Final Act. We lived in a permanently divided Europe, but some signs of the times to come could be seen already at that time. Crossing the border in the 70s was a cumbersome and often unpleasant experience, similar to what people experienced here in Berlin at Checkpoint Charlie. In Russia, we diplomats were locked up in Moscow, not allowed to travel freely around the country, and closely observed when we left the capital. But at the same time, the bilateral trade between Finland and Russia, or the Soviet Union, began to flourish, and the border opened up for more and more goods, industrial in our exports, energy and raw materials in our imports. The Soviet system feared people, but not goods. From the early 60s on, tourism developed slowly in one direction, from Finland to Leningrad. A ship line also trafficked between Helsinki and Tallinn. And the former Estonian president Lennart Meri told me once that this was the first crack in the Iron Curtain from the Estonian point of view. Finns could come to Estonia. The Estonians couldn't go to Finland very often, but the Finns could come as tourists to Tallinn. And very many contacts and friendships were made at that time. With the perestroika in the late 1980s, the Russians got the right to travel. We saw more of them in Finland, and meeting people and traveling was not anymore a one-way street. And after 91 and the collapse of the Soviet Union, our formerly closed border developed quickly into an open border with ever-increasing amount of goods and, what's more important, more and more people crossing it at all times of the day and the year. Today, millions of travelers cross the 1,500 kilometers of the former Iron Curtain each year in both directions. 700,000 visas, Finnish visas, are written in our consulate in St. Petersburg and our embassy in Moscow to Russians to travel in the Schengen area. About 30% of EU exports to Russia cross the Baltic Sea from German harbors to Finnish harbors and go from there on with lorries into Russia to meet the consumer demand. The wall is gone. The fall of the Berlin Wall, as we know, and the Iron Curtain, what I'm talking about now, was a revolution, peaceful and positive. This process made it possible to continue peace building in Europe. It also led to belated reconciliation between states after the Second World War. Finns and Russians agree now, today, on the historical facts of the Soviet aggression against Finland in 1939. Russians and Poles agree finally on the terrible happenings in Katyn, and so on. Opening up of closed borders, physical walls, can be, in the best of cases, rather quick processes, as the fall of the Berlin Wall. In the Finnish experience, the Iron Curtain that divided us from our eastern neighbor and the people there were slowly thinner and thinner and vanished finally in the aftermath of 1989. But I mentioned in the beginning that the wall was not only physical, but also a mental phenomenon. We lacked during the Cold War understanding and insight because of non-existing contacts between people to people. In Europe's case, the fall of the wall was necessary base on which peace building and reconciliation was made possible in the final stage. Globalization and interdependence bring this European experience into a new focus. We will have today, I'm sure, a very interesting afternoon with eminent experts talking and discussing today's theme. And I'm very honored that Mark had asked me to introduce to you the first speaker, Mr. Erkki Tuomioja. Mr. Tuomioja has an extensive CV in different important national and international capacities, and I will mention here only a few. Mr. Tuomioja is a member of the Parliament, chairman of the Grand Committee of EU Affairs in Finland since 2007. He was a Minister for Foreign Affairs for 7 years from 2000 to 2007, as I mentioned. He's my former boss. He's member of Parliament, Social Democratic Party from 70 to 79 and from 91 onwards. Vice Chairman of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party Parliament Group, 91-96, and Chairman 96-99. So I will thank you for your attention, and I will give the floor over to Mark or to Erkki, I don't know. Thank you very much.